Welcome to the Psychotherapy Central podcast, where we discuss love, attachment, and healing from trauma. A place where you can gain the knowledge, tools, and wisdom to help you build secure, flourishing relationships. I'm your host, clinical psychotherapist and couples therapist, Jennifer Nurick. Welcome to today's episodes of Psychotherapy Central. Thank you for being here. Today we're with a very special guest, Cory Allen, to talk about his new book, Brave New You, that is being released today. Cory Allen is an author, podcast host, and influencer from Austin, Texas. Cory writes daily thoughts on meditation and mental clarity for his large Instagram following at Hey Cory Allen, which reaches over 1 million people a week. He's been featured in the New York Times and he's here with us today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to you.
Me too. So I thought we would start with what led you, because most people who go deep into meditation and spiritual practice, I find usually there's something that was a catalyst. Is that the case with you?
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. And, as a side note to that, like meditation, I feel like in my experience, people generally look at as a type of a medicine, some type of cure for something. There aren't many people. In fact, I can't really ever recall coming across one who has been like, you know what? I am perfectly happy, great, unstressed. I think I'm going to start learning how to meditate. We're always looking to alleviate something or go somewhere with it. So yeah, I definitely came to it by the same purposes. And yeah, I came to it because the environment in which I grew up in was challenging. There was a lot of emotional abuse, gaslighting, narcissism. And I know that those terms are really thrown around a lot these days, but this is a bit more on the literal side of those terms for sure. And so, feeling very trapped, anxious, in constant fight or flight mode, and just in intellectual survival mode, emotionally shut down. I was seeking some way to get some relief. And, this is in the 90s, whenever I was a teenager. And, the landscape was so different back then. There wasn't, first off, there was no social media, there was no Google, there was no, iPhones, there was nothing. It was like the languaging for all these things just didn't exist in the same way that it does today. You couldn't Google, like, I feel anxious. Hey, what do I do? Where's 10 steps of, it's just like the wild thing is, there's like, there was no awareness that what you were experiencing wasn't just what life was. Your thought like, I feel this way. This is what it means to be a person. This sucks. And I'm going to try and, numb it or ignore it or just kind of carry on or whatever as much as possible. And so, yeah, what ended up happening, what led me to meditation was feeling all of those things. And it's kind of a funny, just random chance, or you could call it a divine timing. I overheard some people in public talking about if they could have dinner with two people, who would they be? And one person said Nietzsche and Jesus. And I remember thinking, like, whenever I was like 14-ish or something like that, and I heard that name Nietzsche, and I was like, huh, that I don't know who that is, but that sounds cool. It sounds like the edge of a knife, it sounds sharp. And so a little time later, and it is, a little time later, I was in a bookstore, and I should say that like no one in my family reads. There was no books in the house, no anything ever. Um, and so I saw that name on the back of a book, and I was like, oh, there's that name. Okay. And I went over and I looked at it. And for the first time, I thought, this is not necessarily what I think, but this is how I think. Big kind of abstract conceptual ideas. And it really just ignited something in me. So I became obsessed in Western philosophy. After that, I went and started getting into Eastern philosophy. I believe the first book, if memory calls, this is, sadly, we're getting to 30 years ago at this point. But I getting older is awesome. I'm just joking. But It was Essays in Zen Buddhism by D.T. Suzuki. Who, for anyone that's not familiar, he was a very important scholar, Japanese gentleman that was one of the earliest, if not the earliest, people that started translating Eastern thought, particularly Zen, into English for Western cultures. Back whenever before it was, there was no concept of what that was really in the West. And so I remember reading that and I was thinking, okay, this is not only how I think, but it's also what I think. And I became obsessed with reading about Eastern wisdom traditions and always, because I had this forced hyper independence. I went and had no schooling. I didn't seek any teachers or anything. I became a total spiritual, like eclecticist, just reading everything I could compulsively, really, as a form of escapism, a form of, trying to feel like I had some control or something, like I was making progress. So I was obsessed with everything, and I started getting experimental with it too, just trying to mess with my consciousness and see what happened. So that's how I get into it. An interesting thing about it is that speaking in terms that there was no real outline or like it just wasn't meditation, just wasn't it wasn't broken out into little bullet points and nuggets the way it is now. Then it was like, here is a book from 1940 that is this nebulous sort of thing talking about meditation from some weird perspective with like no paragraph breaks for 1,000 words, and it's like you sort your way through it and try and figure out, okay, like what concept are they talking? And fortunately, I found like translations of the Pali Canon at one point, and I was like, well, at least this is kind of systematic. I can just sort of understand and experiment, and so that's how I got into it. All just total autodidact by chance, and I stuck with it because from the very first time I tried, I noticed the results. I saw the texture of my consciousness change, and I realized that as I changed my mind, that the world began to appear different to me as well.
Mm. You mentioned there I started to experiment, and I had the same experience as well. I think when you start to get really curious about how consciousness works and your own consciousness, my own consciousness, I did the same thing. What kind of experiments did you do? And did you kind of scare yourself, or did it kind of push you forward? Or how was the experimentation piece for you?
That's a great question. I love this. So, yeah, like for whatever reason, I never had any fear around inner exploration. I don't certainly don't say that from a place of like ego or anything. It just never occurred to me that it would be unsafe. Like I was just like, this is fine. But and I think it's really because whenever all of those factors clicked into place in terms of like the philosophical mind, the inner exploration type of stuff, what drove me beyond just looking for ways to get out of my suffering state was like infinite curiosity. Just like that was the driving factor, was like approaching because it was so fascinating to me. And it still is 30 years later. I still am endlessly fascinated by the notion of like there is this universe inside of our minds and that our, and I don't not to get too into the weeds here, but that our whole reality is a subjective perception of this world that exists outside of our skin is completely inaccessible. Really, like we can't get to this world outside of our nervous system. And so our conscious reality is this image that's being painted by our past experiences and genetics and inherited behaviors and what we've learned and how we've messed with over. So that was fascinating to me then and still fascinating to me now. So a lot of breathwork stuff to experiment. I would also, uh, I would like go in my closet and take psychedelics and like put a towel under the door and like meditate for hours in the darkness, just to really try and experiment that way. I would do even like Sufi ritualization things I found. I went and started messing with like, I would read Aleister Crowley books for fun because like, oh, this guy's messing with his brain too. And I got into like kind of the hippie Western philosophers like Robert Anton Wilson and Terence McKenna and people like that. And I was like, what are these guys doing to themselves? Let me try some of that. And then, I would get into the pretty academic experimental side of things too. Like, in for example, in the original, in the Pali Canon, there's really complicated mindfulness training, and the mindfulness training is uh, totally brutal. It's wild. I mean, there's a good reason for it, but it's again, not to get too granular here, but it's essentially noting and labeling every arising mental formation, every thought that comes into your mind, not just the thoughts themselves, but also the physicality of your experience. So, for example, and it can get as finely ground as you want, but it would be like, if you're getting up out of bed to go to the bathroom during the night, it would be eyes opening, foot lifting, foot moving, foot touching ground, foot raising, breathing in, and then getting even more detailed with it with like noticing a rising impulse to need to go to the bathroom, acknowledging a rising impulse, right foot dropping, left foot raising, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like really getting into the weeds of all of that type of stuff. And there are, in the training, they will have people, there's like monks that would do that practice literally from the moment their eyes open until they go to bed for I'd read some cases that they would do it for a year or something, where it's just like totally wild. So I would do stuff like that, just practicing those things, experimenting. And the reason that's valuable, by the way, for anyone that's listening and scratching their head, is because through the incessant noting of your physical experience and your arising impulses, it's a way to systematically force the development of the witness mind, which is where your awareness, your self-awareness increases so that in your waking experience, you're aware of what thoughts that you're having, and you have space between your decision making, your thinking, and also your craving, your desires, your impulses to say things, to react, to live on autopilot. So it's a way to sort of really grind that into you so that you're always aware of what's arising inside of you instead of just living in this momentum of reactions and so forth. Um, yes, so those are some of the ways I experimented. There's been a lot more over the years. I'm curious if you'd like to share what some of the things that you did back in the day.
I started back in, was it like the year 2000? And there was an internet at the time. And so I ordered a book on meditation called Meditation for Dummies. And the first exercise was sit in a dark room and look at a candle. And that's
Nice.
how.
Yes. No, that's great. That's funny that that was in that book because that's a really complicated classical technique. If you ever read about in the jhanas, which are like these for people that aren't familiar, there's these eight jhanas and a particular type of Buddhist meditation, which are these kind of energetic awakening practices. They're very amazing and somewhat complicated. But one of the methods that the monks would use to develop what's called access concentration, which is developing an awareness, a point of mind, so that whenever you are looking inward with your eyes closed, you can navigate your thoughts, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, everything that's arising. So it's like in the same way that you can look out into the world and you can focus on things, you're able to look inward and focus with clarity on the different mental formations and everything. So one of the methods that they use, there's two in particular for developing that, and that is developing a one-pointedness by staring at an object for an extended period of time during meditation, oftentimes recommended a candle. So it's amazing that was in there. I used to do that whenever I was like in my early 20s all the time, is I would light a candle and stare at it to develop the one-pointedness of mind until it melted. And I'm curious, like, so whenever I would do that, after about, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes, I would kind of start hallucinating, like the candle would start moving and stretching and getting weird. Did that happen to you as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then I found that I would also have experiences where it would kind of almost kind of come inside of me and I would almost kind of merge with the candle. And so, and I had this similar experience to you that I found it kind of enjoyable. I was always curious what was going to happen and open that nothing may happen at all. Um, and I would have found that I had to get past that the imprint of the candle, sort of when you move your eyes, obviously you have the imprint of the light in the retina. So I would
Yeah.
have to kind of work with that and my own thoughts around, is this good for my eyes? Why is this is this going to damage my eyes by staring at a candle? So there was that process to go through as well. And then as an adult, I've found mantra has been the biggest influence for me. Particular kinds of mantras and work through the chakra system. So different kind of chanting through the chakras, walking meditation, those kinds of practices. So I love Ram Dass. I have a teacher in India who I do quite a bit of work with. Yeah, they're more of my practices, but I'm super interested in the Buddhist practices. I think my sense is that the Buddhists probably know more about the mind than maybe any other spiritual tradition. That's my sense from dabbling in kind of Kabbalah and in Hinduism and Christianity. And my sense is that the Buddhists have a very deep formulation and clear formulation of mind and how to work with mind. Is that your sense?
Absolutely. Oh yes, that's what made me obsessed with it. Like, and if you read something like the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is like one of the three Pitikas, the three baskets of knowledge, it's basically like this whole really complicated system of Buddhist psychology, and it's great. It's fascinating. It's unreal, and like again and again and again, they're like describing things 2000 years ago that like today neuroscientists are like, hey, that yeah, well, check this checks out, you know. It's just like it's mind blowing. Yeah, the navigation and mapping of mind is just like it really doesn't make any sense. You know, like it's sort of like it doesn't it's never clear to me how that level of insight was possible that long ago and that people are still very far behind, you know, in the modern world or like generally people are very far behind, but to have that level of wisdom, um, with that limit of like with that level of limited experience is it's unbelievable.
Mm. To me, it kind of makes sense because I imagine that learning and those teachings being passed on from master to student in those really quiet environments with all of the distraction. My imagining is back then it was easier almost to go deeper than it is today, especially in the West with so much distraction.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. I mean, it is all in there. You know, you just have to be able to have the time and space and focus to find it and look at it. And yeah, I suppose if if you don't have all that distraction, yeah. No, it's remarkable. And it's just even the view of um having it written that the Buddha was like would say the Dharma has to evolve. Like it always needs to evolve, not only with the times, but also with the location, because he understood that like what makes sense maybe in America, it's not going to make sense in Burma. What makes sense there is not going to make sense, and so on and so on. And just really fascinating to have that level of understanding of like how things change over time as well. Of course, I guess coming from the guy that came up with the idea of impermanence, it makes sense.
Super fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm sure
Of
listeners,
course.
yeah, just to hear about people's lived experience, so rich. And I'm kind of in awe of that little 14-year-old, 15, 16-year-old boy, in the bookstore, really looking for something and tackling those really deep texts. And I mean, at that age, I only had access to a Bible that my grandparents had given me. Also, a house without many books. And I remember around that age really starting to read through the Bible, like maybe there's something in there for me, looking for something. So you found the books.
Yeah.
I found it was
Yeah.
Bible wasn't very helpful for me at the time. I'll be transparent about that. Yeah, that's that feeling of kind of searching. So yeah, I have a part that's in awe of your younger part doing that. Amazing. Mm.
Oh, thank you very much. That means a lot. It's to me it was when I think about it, and it doesn't really it is odd to me, if I think about like what I was doing and like the what I was reading at the time and then the timing in which I discovered the things, it's just like I don't really I don't know, maybe it's synchronicity. I don't know if I believe in some divine plan or code or something that's unfolding. But it certainly, if I look at another 14-year-old today as a 42-year-old man, I'm like, how was I doing what I was doing? Because like at the time, I would go and I would find these super complicated books where I would find things like whatever the popular neuroscience books were, or I would read like I would get obsessed with like Korzybski's System of General Semantics and was reading his this book called Science and Sanity. This is another. I was like, as a kid, I would be like, I'm recreating this thing called the structural differential from this book from the 1930s about semantics and how, our relationship to pencil is, we say the word pencil and map it on to the idea of the concept, but then we have to take to account for all of the basically the domino or accordion versions of our association with that object and how that influences our symboling of this object in reality, and now apply that to all symbols of reality, including your own consciousness. It's like I was just so. But what I would do is I would just read the same sentence over and over and over until it made sense, and I found that doing that it would actually make me feel kind of high. And then one day I realized that the highness was the feeling of my consciousness expanding because I was like, oh, I'm literally thinking myself into a bigger like reality right now. And yeah, just a mixture of trying to escape trauma and having have a curiosity for it. It all worked out.
Mm. I love what you just said there about kind of reading that line over and over and how it expanded your consciousness, which again, because the person who wrote that sentence, they often have a lived experience of the thing that they're trying to share. And so I wonder if
Yeah.
something just kind of in the words and in the energy of the words, and which makes me think about the power of a book, which leads us beautifully into your book. And the first question, kind of, what does being brave in your life really mean?
I love that question. And no one has asked me that yet. I'm so glad that you asked that. I think that we tend to think about it backwards, right? I think we think about bravery in general in terms of how it exists in the scripts and movies. What is this character going through? What's happening in the world that they need to face? What are the threats, some of the barriers that they're finding that they need to push through? And I suppose that's one way to look at it, but I think about it in the inverse. I think about it as like bravery is trusting yourself. Bravery is listening to what's arising, to your intuition, to your instincts of what feels right, and being able to actually hear that and to hear yourself and to decide to move forward into the unknown with that level of self-trust. Because especially now more than ever, we compare ourselves so much to everyone else on social media in the world. There's so much information that hits us all day that's wrong, that's it's just that doesn't it's lies, it's manipulated, it's leverage, it's all angled towards sales in most cases. It's all status and everything. And um it's very confusing, I think, for people. And it makes it to where we're looking at this landscape of like, okay, here's all this information talking about a million different things. Here are all these people. And of course, particularly in America, hyper individualism is a huge, has become this really, really overwhelming, part of culture where, and of course, it's to show like, look how special I am and how different I am and how much value I have compared to everyone else. You can really see that represented in social media, of course. And so the normal person, a average human being that's just existing within all of that stuff, they're like who do I be? Like what is the right, like how do I, like how should I exist in the world? And I think that the bravery aspect is being able to cut away and really let go of allowing all of that stuff outside of you, what's meaning to other people to influence you, and really beginning to listen to what feels right to you and move in towards that, even though there's not a clear path or someone else to kind of replicate or help you get to wherever it is that you might feel you need to go.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I'm just really sitting with that feeling of kind of that bombardment and how tricky it can be being raised or growing up in this environment to distill that quieter inner voice relative of
Mhm.
to the noise that's around. Yeah. Do you have tips for that in the book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I really tried to lay out a plan. I thought, let me imagine, one experiment I like to do personally is thinking about what is an individual's life like? Like, how are they seeing the world? Why are they going to social media or to a book? Why would they pick it up? Like, what's happening in their life and in their mind and in their mindset that would draw them to go, I want to look at Instagram and try and see if I could find something useful. I want to get this book and see if I could try and find something useful. It's like what propels someone to do that? And I really sat with those ideas and I thought, I want to make it to where anyone can pick up this book and it's going to lead them to this place I'm talking about. And it's all going to unfold in a linear way so that they're supported. There's one step goes into the next. And it may not even seem like that's the next thing they need to learn. But just through experience, my own personal experience, I know that like that's what a person's going to encounter next. That's the next chunk, and here's the next chunk. And so um, in the book, I start with what I call mental house cleaning. It's really opening up that self-awareness, starting to identify the challenging thoughts that you have, the negative thoughts, overthinking, imposter syndrome, self-consciousness, all those type of things that limit you from being able to ultimately hear your own instincts, your own intuitions. Because if you constantly have these intrusive thoughts, you're battling the your old behavior patterns of thinking, then there's never going to be any space for you to be able to hear anything beyond that. And so there's a lot of tools in there to be able to not only just start to recognize these thinking habits, but how to work through them from start to finish, how they look in your life, what to do, whenever you encounter them, so you can actually start working through them, as opposed to just kind of writing about like, okay, here's what it is. It's like, here's what it is. Here's what it looks like when it shows up in life, and here's how to work through it. And there's a very minor example of that. Like one of the things I like to talk about, and I do talk about in the book a good deal, is these mental narratives that we all experience. Um, our mind naturally creates story for us. And, as we move through our lives, at any point in time, we're always thinking in terms of this happened and now this happened. And this is kind of the story of what I'm experiencing right now. And that's good because if we didn't have this narrativization of our consciousness, basically we would be sitting in a room at one moment and be like, oh, I guess I'm in a room. And then we would like open our eyes and be like, oh, God, I guess I'm in the grocery store. And then it would be just this, it would be these snapshots of existence. It would be very confusing and it wouldn't work very well. So we need to feel like I was at home and I decided to go to the grocery store. for a reason. Here's all this meaning and purpose behind that. And so one of the things that happens is, we don't have all the information in the stories. And so what our brain does is it fills in the gaps with assumptions. And that is useful because it keeps the story together and it can kind of like project some possibilities. But the issue is that our brain, from evolutionary psychology point of view, our mind, its most important feature is to protect us and to get us to procreate. That's mainly, it wants us to keep living. So it would prefer for us to be safe than be happy or feel good about ourselves a lot of times. And so it will kind of archive all of these negative experiences we've had in the past, times we've been embarrassed, whenever we've had someone be, mean to us, whenever we've been emotionally hurt or something like that. And in the spaces, the gaps in the story, it will generally insert one of those things as a possibility because it's not trying to be mean and make us feel anxiety. It's trying to protect us by preparing us for what could happen again so that we don't find ourselves in that negative situation again. And so what this can look like in life is, for example, one that everyone has experienced before, is if you text a friend and then you say, "Hey, what's going on?" Then they don't respond. And a few days go by, and you're like, "That's weird. I wonder if, like, was I like upset them?" And you start thinking back, like, when was the last time we talked? Like, what did I say? Like, what are they not responding because they're mad at me or something? And then, another day goes by, and then you're like, "Oh, no, they're just blowing me off." Now, now you turn that into a little bit of frustration, anger instead of fear. And now you're like, "Oh, what's up with this person? Too good to respond to me now." And then the next day they respond to you and they say, "Hey, I've been traveling. I'm sorry I missed this. I can't wait to, reconnect soon," or whatever. And then so you spent these 2 or 3 days going through this cycle of emotions, filling in the gaps whenever you had no factual information whatsoever, creating this story. And the real, tragedy of that, which we all experience, is that in that window of time, what's happening is that your actual present experience is being influenced by the mindset in which you're thinking. And so if you're feeling sort of rejected and frustrated, even if it's in the back of your mind, as you show up in the rest of your day, it's going to influence how you exist in the world. Because, of course, how you feel influences how you think, and how you think influences how you act. And how you act is who you are, you know? And so being able to, it's something as simple as that, being able to recognize, and this is one of the things, I would show in the book, one of dozens of these type of tools just around thinking, is whenever you have one of those moments arise, being able to recognize the story for a story, stop for a moment, and just by recognizing it, you step out of the feedback loop that you're in, where you're just adding and buying more into the story and increasing the emotion. And then being able to just pause and mindfully consider, like, what actual information am I dealing with here? And it's kind of mind blowing whenever you do that with yourself because you're like, "Oh, the real story here is I sent a text message." That's all that's happened. There's been no, no response, information, or anything to lead me to believe that there's any type of issue or relationship, conflict or anything. The real fact is you're a person that sent a text, and just being able to have those sort of distancing tools and clarification tools are really, really useful. So that's one of the many things just in the thinking portion of the book.
So valuable because I don't think there'll be one person listening to this who listens to what you just said and thinks, "What's he talking about?"
Yeah. Definitely.
It is part of our human experience. Do you think after a lot of Buddhist training for people who are in that environment, maybe in Myanmar or some of the Buddhist countries, maybe they've grown up as a monk, do you think they have that kind of negativity bias, or do you think that their mind often is kind of being cleansed of that?
That's a good question. I think at the end of the day, people are people, but I also think that our environment greatly influences our thinking patterns. And
Mm.
of course, whatever type of teaching that we have really influences us as well. So I assume that they probably do have that, but I imagine they probably have a very different way of relating to those thoughts instinctively than we all do.
Mm. And that just brings me to, I guess, a personal curiosity around kind of, I think it was Jack Cornfield who was talking about how a lot of the Eastern teachings were developed in a context of collectivism and just a different kind of societal context. And how what we're facing in the West right now is obviously unprecedented in the East and in the West too. And so we need almost slightly different teachings. And Jack Cornfield, I think it was in After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, he was talking about how that there's a need for that some of the Eastern teachings around meditation and those kinds of spiritual practice, but he also found that there was a powerful place for the psychotherapeutic work. So kind of more of the psyche or parts of self, however you might relate to it, that have been formed through living in a, particularly in a Western culture. I know that that might be a bit deep, but this is just amusing that something I've been thinking about quite a bit.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that, all forms of medicine, no matter where they're from, are generally applicable to all of us, And I think that using some of the Western framework of psychology along with some of the Eastern modalities is what really how you get a complete picture of mental wellness in general, because the Western approaches are good because they're very systematic and very, they're um, generally quite cut and dry, and not a lot of room for interpretation. A lot of them, it's like, here's an issue, here's how you treat the issue. We're done. There's no, there's not a lot of discussion. But the Eastern approach to things is, like you said, is a bit more effervescent, which has its upsides and downsides. So yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, using both of those is really where um, you can make some really incredible breakthroughs, and that seems to be the way of things. Now, I mean, you'd know much more about this than me, but that seems to be sort of where a lot of the popular writing and stuff is headed, in my view. Do you find that as well?
I do. I find it's quite interesting how in the trauma space recently, suddenly everybody's gone, oh, the body's involved with trauma. Oh, there's kind of feelings in the body that kind of are connected to deep childhood traumas. It's kind of like, yes, of course, because the body's present for all of that. So yeah, that's kind of like almost it felt almost like a revelation in the last 10 years. And I guess I've been working with doing somatic work for a really long time. So there was part of me that's like, yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost like they've been talking about the mind-body connection and Eastern thought for hundreds of years for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um, so for people listening, I mean, self-confidence comes up a lot in our culture, maybe as a flow on from the amount of anxiety. I mean, what are the main mental health issues people will write on an intake form? Usually it's depression and anxiety. So, I mean, is self-confidence kind of an antidote to anxiety? I'm just wondering that first. And then how can we build self-confidence?
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting to think from a nervous system state that um, depression and anxiety are both so commonly paired together, because if you have the literal depression of the nervous system, but then you have a nervous system which is agitated at the same time, it's sort of like someone taking an upper and a downer at the same time. It's like that's an awful combination of feelings that so many people are feeling. Um, yeah, I think that does have that self-confidence, I think, is a real um useful way to, I think, balance out certainly anxiety, and I think a decent amount of depression, because and I think we should talk about what self-confidence is, or at least how I talk about it in the book. Um, I certainly don't mean it in terms of bravado or any aggressive form of confidence. What I mean is developing this ability to hear yourself and accept what your own guidance, I suppose. Hearing like this is like how I want to proceed in life. Instead of overthinking that and talking yourself out of it or talking down to yourself and making it where you're like, well, that's not possible for me. I'm going to be stuck in this thing forever. The confidence comes from literal self confidence of being like, okay, this is me, the capital S self that's saying this. I trust that. Like I'm feeling that, I'm hearing that for a reason. I don't have all the answers of why or where it's going to lead, but I'm going to go with it because it's what I feel and I'm thinking right now. And I think that that's really where I'm trying to, guide an individual in this book is to a place to where they begin to notice what is meaningful to them in their lives. What are the things that they do that they're interested in, that they want to change and evolve, that give them that feeling of energy. It's like whenever I was 14 reading these, philosophy books. It lifts you out of your seat. It just there are things in life that all of us can experience that give us that feeling. And for some reason, a lot of the times there's a lot of guilt around that. People go like, "Oh, this doing this in life makes me so excited, but I don't want to do it too often because, I whatever, or I don't want to. I can't focus on that too much." It's like, why not? If it's the thing that excites you that you love, like make it a feature. Make it an important part.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, but being able to see these different things, and these can be, one of the reasons I talk about like what's possible in the book and how there's more is possible for us in our lives is like that doesn't mean that you have to go be a number one best-selling author or star in the NBA or something like that. It's like that could be one of your goals and that's fine. But it really means like that just change on any level in any part of your life is available. And one of the things I point out at the beginning is that the reason why we generally think that's not true, in my opinion, is because we get so used to living in the same behavioral and thought patterns for so long that we get used to what we're experiencing and we start to see that as what's normal. And it's like, it's not what's all that there is, it's just what you've gotten used to. And that's really hard for people to see, but once you start realizing that, and I, walk the reader through this in the book of like, you can make these little tiny changes. And and you should make them tiny. I talk about the importance of setting attainable goals, like make little tiny changes. And then once you see that you can make that little change and there's this 1% difference in your life, then you go, huh, interesting. Like I was feeling bad about myself. And so I decided that I was just going to pay a little bit more attention to like dressing better or just so I'll feel a little bit sharper. And so you choose to do that. You look up some stuff online, you get some ideas, you sort of make some changes. You're like, hey, I feel a little bit better about myself. Cool. That's not crazy. That's not dunking on LeBron James in the NBA, but it is a little change. And the process is doing that, recognizing you've got this receipt now. You can look back and you go, huh, interesting. The process here was I recognized with my self-awareness that there was something that I wanted to change that I was unhappy with. I made a clear choice about what that was. I trusted my own voice about saying that I wanted to make that change, and I did it. And now look, now I'm different and I feel better. That means that maybe I can do this again. Maybe I can do it with something else. And the more that you do that, that's how you actually start that process of building self-confidence, just slowly, slowly folding that same cycle into itself over and over again until one point where you're sitting there and you're like, I want to start a business. And instead of having this voice that goes, no, no, not you. You don't get to do that. Other people can do that. You have to keep working the same job you hate forever. Instead of having that voice going on in your head, you've got the voice that goes, great. Like, how do we start? You know?
Mm. Did you? I saw a little smile at the end there. Like, how was it for you writing the book? Kind of, I'm almost feeling you kind of imagining the people that you're writing for and designing that journey for them. What was that process like?
Really exciting. Really exciting. One of the things I did was I paid attention closely to the comments, the engagement I get on all the different writing that I put out in the world, the different themes, the ideas, and I really paid, and of course on my DMs that I get all the time, and I really paid a lot of attention to what topics and what sort of pain points that people are experiencing, and I archived all of that. I wrote and made clear notes. I made all this big thing of like, okay, I want to understand not what I think people should experience, like what's actually happening out there, what's the culture asking for and resonating with. And so I worked all of those into this linear growth path in the book, and it was really exciting to me because not only were there things I had experienced as well, but it's like I know how this is going to hit somebody. I know how much this is going to help them. And so the whole process of it was just really exciting. And because I just know in my own experience the difference between feeling how I felt kind of pre all of this, doing all this stuff myself in my life and afterwards. And the idea that someone else could feel that way is, yeah, just really, it means the world to me.
Mm. And for everyone listening, I don't even know how I came across your Instagram. I just found that every post I read of yours, I resonated with, and I ended up just sharing heaps of your content. Eventually, I thought, who is this person? So I went down like a little bit of a rabbit hole. And then I saw you had this book coming out, and then I got to meet you in person. So for everyone listening, Cory's Instagram handle again is at Hey Cory Allen. That's right, isn't it? At Hey Cory Allen.
Yeah.
Keep there. Anything else before we finish that you would love people to know about the book, Brave New You? Anything else?
Well, first of all, I just really appreciate you sharing the work and saying the nice things about the writing I put online, and um, it all really fundamentally it goes back to what we were talking about before, is like understanding these fundamental human experiences that we're all facing the same challenges, the things that we just all experience them at a different time in our lives, but we generally all go through the same things and have the same thoughts. And for me, I just pinpoint those things and talk about them with my own experience and put them into words that actually have motion so people can apply it and really think about it in the moment. Because to me, wisdom arises whenever you have an awareness, you have knowledge, so you have something you're remembering, but then you have to encounter a situation in life in which you apply that knowledge. And whenever that happens, that's whenever wisdom and insight arise. And so I try to set them all up like they're these little packages. So you remember it, and then whenever it happens, you can use it yourself. And yeah, so thank you for seeing that. Um, yeah, as far as the book goes, I really hope people just enjoy it and that it's fun for them, that it really helps them foster more mental clarity, that deep connection with themselves, and then gives them the boldness to, focus on what's meaningful to them in life instead of what they've been told should be meaningful to them.
Mm. I've already pre-ordered a copy and I intend to go through it with one of my kids. I have a feeling one of my children he's actually 15, and I have a feeling that he'll be curious about your book. So I've ordered a copy and we're going to do some bedtime reading together.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. And I'd love to hear how it's received if you have time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let you know. For those listening, if people want to reach out to you, they want to connect with you, you have a suite of offerings on your website, but maybe if you just want to let people know about how they can connect with you and yeah, get more of this for people who I'm listening to you and I'm feeling already, I can tell, yeah, just from listening how much work you've done, how much inner realization there is. So anyone listening, I would highly recommend that they get in touch with you and do more work with you. And how would they do that?
Thank you. Thank you so much. They go to, if you go to cory-allen.com, that's where there's a lot of stuff on my site. And of course, my social media is there. And in terms of the book, if you go to bravenewubook.com, you can check out some details and stuff about the book. And just ending with a note, you mentioned this is something I've been noticing and enjoying recently, and I think you'll enjoy this. You mentioned just seeing and feeling that I've done a lot of inner work. One thing that kind of a hack you can use is whenever you hear someone using the word arising a lot, whenever they're talking, that's a good sign. It's just kind of a silent little sign that they've done a lot of a lot of internal work, because it means they've trained their mind to observe thoughts and impulses and mental formations and things that are coming up inside of them in the present moment.
I love that. I love that. I'll listen out for it.
Yeah, please do. It's very funny.
I've learned so much today, and I feel like you've actually ignited in me more curiosity to step forward into a bit more Buddhist teaching. So thank you so much,
Amazing.
and
Of
we'll
course.
in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is really, really fun.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. If you want to learn more about all things love, attachment, and trauma, I'd love to connect with you on Instagram at psychotherapy.central or visit my website at psychotherapycentral.health. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review and a 5-star rating. Your support means a lot, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.